Hello, y'all. This is the poorly named Unnamed podcast. I am your host, Fowler, and I am with Ardot. We're going to be talking about the submarine and also potentially a civil war in the middle of Russia. So it's been spicy. When we started planning this earlier in the week, Ardot and I were like despairing because there just wasn't anything happening in the news, and then a whole heap load of death occurred, like at the end part. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that was a good intro. I just need to tell you, don't ever say y'all again, please. Don't remove that from your vocabulary.
What
Uh,
do you mean? I lived in the South for years. I can say y'all.
no, it only works if you actually sound like you live in the South. You sound like you're from fucking New York, New York City, or
Mm.
wherever it is you're from. So, you know, it would be like a posh British professor saying how he's gonna go down to the riverbed and toss a line into the water and drink a couple of cold ones and no. No, that's I just had to say that. I'm sorry, Fowler.
I respect people who are willing to go out of their cultural comfort zone and appropriate other people's culture. The master of that was Teddy Roosevelt. He was a rich New Yorker who pretended to be a cowboy his entire career, and we gave him the Medal of Honor, the presidency,
Or
and a Nobel Prize.
or George Bush, who I just found out is actually from Connecticut, like last week.
Yeah, you know who else is, I think, from Connecticut? If I'm remembering this correctly, John Fetterman is like from Connecticut, and he has a degree at like Harvard Business.
Well,
So like his
John
whole like
Fetterman doesn't. John Fetterman looks like he acts. Like John Fetterman looks like a guy who is named John Fetterman and who looks like that. George
well,
Bush,
that's what I'm
like
saying though, is he's actually Fetterman is actually pretty prestigious and pretty accomplished.
yeah,
Like his whole I'm an average everyday man. I mean, I he might be, but like
yeah. But
he definitely is a fancy pants.
George Bush did like a reverse Rachel Dolezal. He did that. It's amazing. Really, an amazing transformation. Uh,
Yeah, it's astounding that he was an alcoholic, self-admitted alcoholic who ran on the slogan "Someone you want to have a beer with."
You know what? I fucks with him for that. That's the president America needs. Uh,
Mm.
fuck this country up. But anyway, we're
So
not
the
here.
sub,
We're
oh,
not
so
here
the
to.
submarine is
If you
a
interrupt me again, I'm gonna
complicated.
kill you. All right.
You and what army? You're
Stop.
not the Wagner group. You're not going to take me out.
I'm so tired. Fuck you for making me do this podcast at fucking 10:15 at night. Um. Anyway, I'm not going to wax poetics about the failures of the Bush administration. That's not why I'm here. We are going to talk about the conclusion to the week-long submarine incident or submersible incident that happened. A submersible is a is like a small submarine. A submarine is like bigger, I think, or is am I right? A submersible and a submarine are two different.
I have no fucking idea whether you're right.
So a submersible is like meant to carry a small number of people, I think. So it's a submersible, not a submarine. But everybody's calling it a submarine because, to the average man, anything that goes underwater and has a person is a submarine. So, um, but the sub was,
So we basically found out that everyone on the sub died from the submarine imploding, and we'll probably never find their corpses, and it's pretty hardcore.
yeah, they literally imploded, not exploded.
Oh,
And
what did I say?
you said exploded, like they're fucking in space. Um,
I mean, space, the deep ocean, they're both zones of cold, dark, existential horror. And any man brave enough to traverse either is basically putting his life into the hands of God. So.
space is easier, apparently. I'd rather be in space than the fucking ocean. Um,
Yeah, I'm waiting for the day that one of Elon Musk's like colonizing, terraforming rocket ships goes to Mars and it explodes and kills everyone.
yeah. Yeah, and we're not too far away from that. But in all seriousness, it is I say it's a terrible tragedy, but I'm somewhat comforted knowing that they died quickly and it wasn't they weren't trapped down in the bottom of the ocean for fucking 4 or 5 days running out of oxygen. Um,
I was surprised by how hardcore a lot of the people were. Like a lot of people on Twitter, even before people knew that they all died, were sort of celebrating it because it's like 250,000 a pop to get in the submarine. So they were all like rich fucks. But I was surprised by how disconnected everyone was to like the death. It was just a lot of memeing, and I don't know. I guess the internet detaches us in a way that makes that sort of behavior more likely. But it did surprise me. I feel
uh,
like I've not seen a news event where someone was definitely going to be dead at the end of it, where people were as like disconnected from it. You know what I mean?
I think it was definitely a left wing Twitter thing. I don't think everybody was acting like that. Around the same time the sub disappeared, there was a ship, a migrant ship off the coast of Greece that sunk, and there were a lot of people juxtaposing the media coverage of the missing sub versus the media coverage of the migrant ship sinking. Um,
Mm. That was the one where it was dozens, right, of people died.
Hundreds of people,
Yeah.
possibly, on the migrant boat off the coast of Greece. I haven't really seen I don't know, because on one hand, I think the media attention given to the submarine was a little bit over exaggerated. But I think it had all the elements of a gripping news story, in ways that the migrant ship just didn't. The sinking of the migrant ship off the coast of Greece was a tragedy, and you know, I don't know.
The migrant ships, though, they crash or fall apart or sink all the time. There's nothing sexy about it in the way the submarine is. So it
Yeah,
means for I was gonna say for better or for worse, but it's definitely for worse. It just leads to a lot of people shipping out. It's kind of like The Dark Knight, that movie where the Joker says like, even if a lot of people die, if it's according to the plan, nobody panics. And it's in the same way where there's some elements of life that are incredibly grisly and deadly, but because we expect them to be, they're not covered, and then because they're not covered, no attention is really taken to them, and therefore the situation isn't rectified.
yeah, it's I completely agree with that, and then I also agree, with the submarine, um, the submersible story. I almost want to give a rundown of what happened for people who don't know, but I feel like it's impossible at this point to not know what happened. Just a brief rundown. Really, really, really rich guy creates a company called Ocean Gate where he takes people to explore the wreckage of the Titanic. Um, $250,000 to get on this tiny van sized cramped submersible that takes you 2.5 miles down to the bottom of the ocean. Uh, the ship had gone down there without a hitch 3 other times. Each time they'd lost communication with the mothership. Um, and as more and more things come out, we've learned that the CEO of the company, who was actually on the submersible and is deceased, he was cutting corners. He wasn't really into safety. Uh, there were all sorts of regulatory violations, or that he ignored. Submersible and deep sea exploration is a very shoddy legal area because, from what I understand, uh, when you're out in the Pacific Ocean, you're in international waters, and there's gray legality about what you can and can't do. So the deep sea exploration, field is, you can get away with certain things. The the submersible that was destroyed had not been approved or examined by the correct regulatory bodies that it needed to be. And the company actually fired the person whose job it was to analyze safety and to enforce safety regulations. The person who was fired said, this craft is There's a lot of things wrong with this craft that need to be fixed. It was made of carbon fiber, which is not a very stable material. For example, James Cameron's deep sea Challenger, the ship that took James Cameron to the Mariana Trench, was made of steel, and it was shaped like a cylinder, uh, for even so that it could have even distribution of water pressure.
They
Carbon,
also had Windows, which apparently is also like a kind of an engineering no-no when it comes to being that deep.
yeah, had windows, which you're not supposed to have windows. I mean, no, some military submarines don't have windows. Carbon fiber is used on airplanes, and it has to be checked. I mean, carbon fiber has to be checked every couple thousand miles. From what I understand, they hadn't even checked it once since it had been down to the Titanic 3 different times. Um, carbon fiber is very light, but it's not very durable. It's very, very unpredictable. Um, they hand bolted it together, which is even more insane. I mean, there's just I could go on and on. There's so much stuff that's coming out about the way that the CEO operated, and the way that the sub was designed, all sorts of things. This was a completely avoidable tragedy. I think that's the thing that people need to understand. This was completely avoidable. Um, Now, it's as everything, as is everything in the 21st century. There are people making it political. Definitely, I think the fact that they're billionaires and um, they died doing arguably stupid billionaire shit, has made people on the left kind of jump for joy. Uh, but also, the right is kind of taking apart a quote that was said by the CEO, where he basically said, and Fowler, we talked about this today. I think you remember where he said that he didn't want to hire 50-year-old white men because it wasn't an inspirational story. He wanted the CEO, the deceased CEO, wanted to hire young, diverse engineers to work on this craft. And of course, the right has taken that and is running on that. Although not as much as I thought they would. I think the absurdity of the situation is almost too much for even the farthest, uh, the people on the farthest right. Um, but considering that we're in the middle of the anti woke versus woke culture war, it makes sense that they take it that way. And I said to Fowler earlier, I think if we take his quote at face value, and I think this is something that has become more apparent to me, and definitely not every company is doing this, but I think the large push for um, young, diverse types is in part because corporations know that young, diverse types are a lot easier to push around. And I think, looking at the way in which the craft was designed, the fact that the CEO had multiple times talked about disregarding safety regulations, that he is on record saying many times that safety was not the priority, and safety was a hindrance uh, to the building and operating of his vehicle. Um, when I hear him say something like, I don't want to hire, 50-year-old white men because it's not inspirational, all I hear is I want to hire young, diverse people because they're not going to tell me that my craft is unsafe. They're not going to have the experience to know, to really know, you know, whether or not this craft is safe. They're not going to have the experience to know how to stand up for themselves. They don't have the experience to know, you know, they don't have the experience to know when to have a spine and when to put their foot down about what's right and what's wrong.
I don't know if I buy into that necessarily. I think it's just a pleasant bonus that people are less prepared. But like the military does it for the same way too, and I think it's just inclusiveness is extremely efficient. Like um, the whole idea of basically, you know, we're gonna pull in everyone. We're gonna make it so that we can recruit from the farthest reaches of Earth Like that's just very practical. It's why the military is not for the woke bullshit, culture war stuff. It's they know that stuff isn't good for their bottom line. That like if they want to recruit the maximum amount of people to be soldiers or to do anything like that, then that requires them recruiting everyone. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with you. From the practical sense, pulling from a larger pool of people is good. I'm speaking more to an unfortunate potential reality um, that that can occur in corporate situations or in corporations. Not saying it's every corporation or that it's every you know political body. But definitely in the case of this, submersible incident, I think it's something to be aware of. Um, Deep sea exploration is an industry where you can't hire for the sake of hiring, for the sake of it's where deep sea exploration is a field where you can't just hire for the sake of wanting to have, a young, diverse group of people working because it's a very, very, very high stakes industry where, you know, you have to have 50-year-old, you know, veterans, guiding you. Um, it's not a field where you can really, barter with, experience and barter with things like that. I think aviation is the same way. Uh, so I agree with you overall that pulling from a larger pool of people and pulling from a larger pool of people is you can find experienced people from all pools. It doesn't have to just be like 50-year-old white men. I'm sure there are plenty of people who are not 50-year-old white men who have plenty of experience in different fields. Um, but knowing the type of or seeing the type of corporation that Ocean Gate is, it wouldn't surprise me if their goal, or at least part of their goal, was part of their hiring practices were used to skirt regulations.
Yeah, it could be. It's just a shame. I don't know. It kind of goes to show you how why regulations are so important because like you need to trust that the guy taking you to the bottom of the ocean or fucking letting you skydive or that the professionals you're working with are not going to just kill you due to their own incompetence. You know what I mean? And it kind of speaks to how dangerous it is when you just let anyone do anything, which is sort of the position that a lot of these that the people in the submersible like have found themselves in, where they thought they were dealing with someone who was relatively competent, and they just found out deep under the ocean that that guy was completely unprepared for that reality.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I'm interested to see what if this is going to lead to any sort of political fallout. I don't really know. I mean, I would
You
definitely.
said it's international, right? The thing, so it might be that there's not really an ability to um go after them in the way they could if they were just like an American company in America.
Yeah, well, the company I don't think is international. It's the Titanic operates in a shady legal zone. Most deep sea submersibles, from what I understand, operate in very very difficult legal zones because they're so far out in the water. Um, the U.S. Coast Guard and the Canadian Coast Guard were deployed. You know, to look for the submersible. Because of the position of where the Titanic is. Um, it's another thing I keep seeing, and I want to address this because I fucking knew this was going to happen. So I haven't spoken with you about this, Fowler, but the Navy said, I think yesterday, that they had picked up a essentially the implosion had been caught on naval sound machines. I don't know the specific word for um what the device is that you use to pick up sound underwater, but the Navy actually picked up the implosion on Sunday. Of course, they didn't know what it was, and so they sent it in for analysis. And in retrospect, looking back, they're pretty sure that the sound that was picked up, the anomaly, was the sound of the implosion on Sunday. They just didn't know what it was at the time because, they weren't alerted to the sub's disappearance by Ocean Gate until 8 hours after, 8 hours after the fact. Because, again, I didn't state this at the beginning, that the submarine could only send, or the submersible could only send text messages to the mothership, and the mothership would send it text messages back to direct it on where to go. So there was no way of communicating that there was a problem, if a problem arose. Just overall a ridiculous design. I mean, I still am kind of, the more I learn about the submersible, the more I'm like, how the fuck did this, how the fuck would something like that even be just, it's just inconceivable to me. I don't know shit about fucking submarines, submersibles, water shit. And I feel like, I fancy myself pretty intelligent. I feel like if I saw that shit and you told me it was made of carbon fiber, I'd get my ass home. I wouldn't get in that thing if it were in a fucking swimming pool. I don't care. Uh,
I imagine that, like, to some degree, you feel like you're protected by your wealth, that you're like a billionaire, and a bunch of them I was reading, like, they had, like, climb mountains. I think one of them was a space tourist. So I think, like, at a certain point, you have done the impossible so many times, and you've just been paid for that experience that
yeah.
you
But
you basically just don't realize.
one of the guys was named Mr. Titanic. He was like obsessed with deep sea travel. So I'm even more confused as to how he didn't know, looking at that shit. Like if he was someone who considered himself an expert and he was apparently in the field. He was a an expert. But again, it's like what you said, it's trust. They just showed up and got on. The person who's really at fault is the CEO and the company.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I mean, we only, as a country, it was during the Teddy Roosevelt's administration that we decided that, like the Pure Food and Drugs Act was passed, and you couldn't basically, like, shit into the meat grinders, and you know let, like, rats live in the factories. Like, it's only been like 100 years ago that, like, we basically agreed, like, if you're gonna serve food in America, you do have to make sure your kitchens are clean. You do have to make sure that, like, when you sell a given thing, you have to be somewhat honest about what's in it. You know what I mean? Like, we're a very young species in that sense, and you've just been allowed to basically do whatever the fuck you want for most of American history.
yeah. No, absolutely. But what I was gonna say real quickly about the Navy picking up the implosion, uh, there are already people saying that, oh, the Navy picked up the implosion on Sunday, knew what it was, and they've been distracting us with the search. This is a conspiracy, a right wing conspiracy.
For what advantage?
To distract us from like Hunter Biden or some shit like that. I don't know. Uh,
Mm.
um, but just to throw a little bit of logic and realism, the Navy, when they picked up the implosion, they had no way of knowing what it was. The actual statement from the Navy is that and they sent it in for investigation when it did happen, so they did do the correct thing. It's just at the time they didn't know what the fuck it was. Um, but just some crazy conspiracy. Let's move on because again, the Titan, you know, submersible just is. It's not much to really say about it. Other than people on Twitter were acting sadistic about it. Don't know how that advances socialism, whatever the fuck they're trying to do. Uh, um, do you want to talk a little bit about the shit popping off in Russia right now? Because it's a this is a developing story. So
Yeah,
what I
as we talk about it, we have to be clear of the fact that like the Russians love their false flags, they love their misinformation. You know, like with the blowing up of the dam, it was days and days of everyone yelling at each other in Eastern Europe about who theoretically blew up the dam or for what reason. So we're gonna say some stuff that seems to be the case, but it could be tomorrow we learn that most of it is full of shit. But
um
essentially, there is a potential civil war occurring in Russia, where the Wagner Group, which is like a group of mercenaries that are mainly recruited out of prisons, they're isn't it they're going after the Ministry of Defense?
yes, they're
I
going
think.
after the Ministry of Defense, and the pretext for this, the justification that they're using, is that the Russian military bombed the Wagner Group. Now, there is indications that the actual bombing of the Wagner Group is a false flag, that there was never any missiles launched, and that the Wagner Group is staging this as a uh, justification for their attack on the Ministry of Defense in Moscow. Um, but we don't know. Again, who knows? And their explanation is that they say that the Ministry of Defense is lying to Vladimir Putin. That in fact there is not a genocide of Russian-speaking people going on in the Donbass region, which, if you guys remember, was the justification for the invasion of Ukraine. Um, and so that's kind of what's happening right now. The leader of the Wagner Group has essentially declared war on the Ministry of Defense. Don't know how this is going to affect the future of the conflict in Ukraine or the future of Russia as a nation. Don't even know if it's gonna if the you know uh if the attempts at, I guess, defeating the Ministry of Defense. I'm not sure really what the goal is going to be in the end, but you know, I believe that the Wagner Group has about 25,000 members. Uh, and that number could grow or shrink depending on if soldiers in Russia who are part of the Russian military decide to defect and join the Wagner Group. Um, so it's an ongoing situation that we're going to be, following very closely. Like we said, it could be nothing. It could be, misinformation. It could be largely propagandized, um, or it could be legit, and some shit could be popping off in the next couple of weeks. We have no idea. Fowler, what do you think?
Well, obviously, it speaks very poorly to the Russian position that they're having people openly flee, and break unity. I think it'll be interesting to see because there's been many people at this point who have said like Putin is losing popularity, Putin is in a position where he's very weakened, Putin is surrounded by all these people who, could solve their problems by, closing their eyes and counting to 10 and looking around and him just ending up dead. So it's just Putin is a clown juggling chainsaws, and there just seems to be more and more chainsaws, and he seems to be worse at catching them. And we're gonna see if he can maintain control of his country or if he's going to mysteriously have a heart attack and retire from public life or whatever it is the Russians do.
I'm gonna give him that Russian Olympic treatment.
Yeah.
Fucking steroid his ass. Um, it's a scary situation, especially since a couple days ago, Putin once again implied that he was willing to launch nuclear warheads against the West. Uh, so it's definitely something that we need to be paying attention to. I don't know if because from what I understand, the Wagner Group is like a proto-Nazi group. Like they're pretty fucking hardcore. Like I don't know if having them in charge uh, would do us any good. Um, but it just speaks
I
to
don't know if it's the case with like fascists in Russia, but Wagner in Germany is like he is very heavily associated with the Nazis. I would be very suspicious of like a group calling themselves the Wagner Group that was like in Germany. But I don't know if like that connotation is the same in Russia. It could be that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. It speaks to the, I guess maybe the fatigue of the war as well. I'd imagine, fighting in Russia, if you're a Russian soldier, is fucking brutal. You know, uh, Russia is not cool enough to do what we did with Iraq and Afghanistan. Uh, this was fucked up. Sorry. I was gonna say that they're
This
not.
is
I was,
this is unironically their Iraq. The war
but
in
it's like,
Ukraine is their Iraq.
yeah, but it's like they suck at it. At least we were able to maintain an air of like, this is totally cool. The Iraq narrative fell apart like 15 years into the war. They're running
How
like,
about that? Brenner was sacked like a year into the Iraq occupation. I think it's just really difficult. Like the technology has advanced to such a point that holding lots of territory is really difficult. Like 100 years from now, you don't have like a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher that can kill an airplane or a helicopter or a tank with like the guy wielding it having no education. You know what I mean? Like the weapons are so advanced that people,
you have to
regular
join the
civilians,
military to know how to operate the weapons, which used to not be the case back in the day. You could just pick up
I would actually
a
argue the
fucking
opposite
sword.
point. I would
Oh,
actually argue the opposite point, which is that like the Ukrainians are not like master fighters, but like the rocket launchers and the tools we're giving them are powerful enough that they can just massacre Russian soldiers. You
yeah.
know?
Well, I meant more so, like, I mean, if they didn't have those weapons, and if we weren't providing them aid, and if I also just think the preconditions to the Russian invasion was never in Russia's favor to begin with. Russia, even before they invaded Ukraine, was a economically stagnant, economically weak country. Um, that um, and also economically, we were in the middle of, or at least partly through the pandemic when the invasion happened. So, they were still suffering the fallout of COVID-19, as was every country. Um, but what I meant by my, earlier statement was more so like, in order to operate complex, heavy weaponry in today's society, you do have to have some knowledge of um, some military background, or at least some knowledge in military weaponry.
I don't know if that's
You
the
know,
case anymore. Like the AK-47 is a favorite for child soldiers because it has like limited recoil and is extremely simple. Like you basically, if
well,
you
an
have a
AK is
thumb,
very different than like a fucking Abrams tank,
well, yeah, but the
or like an
weapons we're giving the
F-22.
Ukrainians that's causing all the damage isn't like tanks. It's like their rocket launchers and things like that, which I don't think require that much training.
Mm,
Like the artillery in like World War II, you have to go to like tank school. You have to learn how to operate these like complex machines. Whereas now, like when we were fighting in Iraq or whatever, like we would like drop weapons and basically like the village yokel could pick up the weapon and like kill an American soldier using that. You know what I mean?
mm, perhaps you're right. I didn't get to finish my full statement. Also, are you saying that you
Oh,
could,
sorry
or
about that.
are you saying you could operate a tank, Fowler? Is that what you're saying to me?
I'm saying I don't know if tanks are really that useful at this point. Like you can blow them up
You haven't
with like
answered my
hand mounted
question.
rocket
Can you
launchers.
operate a tank, Fowler?
Oh, of course.
You have that? Is that on your resume?
It is. Yep.
Tank
Right
operator,
under
Fowler.
right under proficient in Spanish and Microsoft Word.
You can't speak Spanish. Fuck you. Speak to me in Spanish. Say something in Spanish to me, and say something that's not donde es biblioteca, okay? It's gotta be something other than that.
Puedo ir al baño.
Sí.
Got you there.
Sí. No bueno, señor. Y ¿cuántos niños, señor?
I know
Número
it
de,
would be an interesting. It would
número
be an
de teléfono.
interesting.
Número de
It would,
dirección.
it would be interesting to see, like what like actual military people think. But I just like the amount of land that like Stalin or Hitler was able to take and hold in like the 1930s. It's like unbelievable how they were able to basically absorb all of Europe, but like we can't hold Iraq and the Russians can't hold Ukraine. And I can only imagine like that's only because there are a bunch of conditions that make it much more difficult to just hold territory in the way that you used to.
Yeah.
You know,
When I was
like Genghis Khan would be bankrupt. He would like try and take something out of Mongolia, and he would just be stuck if he was in a modern era in like an endless war of some like fucking third rate country.
um what I was the point I was getting at earlier still haven't let me finish. I'm gonna slap the shit out of you. Uh, basically what I was saying earlier though is like, um, back in the day, like I'm talking like pre World War One, like pre World War One and World War Two. Um, you were fighting with like spears and shit and muskets. You know, the level of warfare was significantly less challenging, which meant that um, for the most part, anybody could do it. Um, Anybody could get their hands on some sort of weapon. Um, I don't even know what my whole point was with that. I'm fucking exhausted. But I don't know. I'm curious in the comments. Put in the comments below if you think warfare has gotten more accessible or less accessible. Um, because that's really what it is. Is has warfare gotten more accessible to the average man, or do you think it's become more specialized? Um, and I'm speaking more to like traditional, like heavy warfare, not like you got an AK-47. We might be biased because we're Americans and the level of gun violence we have here is astronomical. So to us, we think it's easy to operate every weapon because we're Americans and we have weapons.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not
You
claiming to
know?
be a military tactician.
Oh, I'm not either. Yeah, we're like one constitutional amendment away from the average American being able to own like the fucking big boy from Fallout 4. So, so we might be biased. I don't know. Um, Anybody from like Denmark or like a fucking a place where you've never seen a gun in your life. Let me know what you think.
I watched this amazing documentary about Japan's police system, which is not ideal. Like the Japanese have a stupidly high conviction rate. It's like 90%. Um, so it's not good. Like they put a lot of people behind bars. But one of the things they're talking about is like the SWAT team has guns, but your average policeman doesn't. And so a part of the documentary they're talking about how like the way the police one of the ways the police incapacitate subjects is they're taught like judo, and they literally like they literally just like wrestle the guy down. You know what I mean? Which is pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, see, that would make people want to be cops so much more than just saying like we're gonna put you through 6 months of like shooting a target and then your fat ass can be a cop. I feel like more people would want to be police officers if they were like, we're gonna literally turn you into fucking Sasuke Uchiha.
Or you don't want to be a cop because you actually do have to get off your ass and literally wrestle these
True.
people down.
Americans, we're American. We don't want to work that hard. True. Forgot about that. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It's how you weed out the sociopaths, in your society. The ones that want to be cops because they get to turn into like fucking a member of the Akatsuki. That's the ones you want to look out for. The smart ones are like, you know what? Sitting on my couch and eating Funyuns is more worth my time.
That's the epitome of my ambition. Is I
Yeah,
want to eat Funyuns, and I occasionally want to discharge my firearm from a comfortable distance.
yeah. And the person has to be unarmed too, because they can't have because that would make me scared. You
Yeah,
know.
I mean, we do shit on cops occasionally, but I do, I don't know. Being a cop in America must be one of the most terrifying things when like any civilian you encounter could plausibly just have like a machine
Yeah,
gun.
no, it's horrifying. I've talked to cops. You know what's interesting? The number one group of people, at least that I've met and that I've seen, that are pro like gun regulations are cops, because the presence of guns in the hands of like Dave the crackhead is a danger to their job and their safety. Um, I'll never forget. I was working one of my. This is the final story, and then we got to close out because we're about to reach the 45-minute mark. But I was at one of my old jobs, and somebody robbed the store. They didn't rob it at gunpoint, but they were shoplifting, and we had a security guard at this job, and the security guard caught the guy and was holding him up, while the police were on their way. And I'm not going to mention what state I'm in, but the state that I live in, we have very, very lax gun laws. Um, very, very lax gun laws. We don't have a lot of gun regulations at all in the state where I live. Anybody can pretty much have a firearm, uh, and get their hands on a firearm. And the person who was robbing the store, who had just like a bag full of shit they were stealing, said to the security guard, who was armed. The security guard had a gun. He told the security guard, I also have a weapon. I also have a weapon. And in the state I live in, it is legal to carry a firearm. The only time it becomes illegal is if you pull the gun and point it at another person, which at that point, if you know anything about firearm training, you never pull your gun and point unless you're going to shoot the person. You know, um, I think that's taught in the military as well, that you don't lift your gun unless you're going to shoot and kill the person you're aiming it at. Um, and so this person who was stealing stuff from the store was saying, I have a gun, I have a gun. And they were saying it as a threat. I mean, they weren't just saying it just to be like, hey, just so you know, sir, I'm carrying a firearm on me. I just want you to be aware, in case it causes you any discomfort. They were saying it because they were stealing, and they knew that, the security guard had to juggle and decide whether or not he wanted to get into a shootout in the middle of a fucking crowded department store with somebody who essentially just walked in and took whatever they want. And so I want people to keep that into perspective, when they think about, weapons and the public having unlimited access to every single weapon under the sun, like it puts law enforcement in a very precarious and difficult situation. Because they're having to worry about their own safety. And that's a very real thing. Like it's not like it's not like a fabrication, you know? Being a cop in Japan sounds so much cooler and less dangerous.
Yeah, it's kind of astounding how normalized. Actually, we probably don't have time for this tangent. The last thing I'll say on that is it's kind of astounding how like normalized violence can be in America. Like I remember when Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister of Japan, died. They talked about in some of the articles um, about how like the last assassination, the last really large assassination that happened in Japan publicly was Asanuma, who died, I think, in the 40s or the 50s. And
That was the sword guy, right?
he was stabbed with a sword, yeah,
Yeah,
a
sorry, sword
wakizashi.
guy.
But they talked about how, like, because there's no real guns and there's not really a violence problem in Japan, like Shinzo Abe, as the leader of Japan, he could like walk around in public without bodyguards. He could give like impromptu speeches like at bus stations and things like that. And you know, you could just never do that in America. You'd be viewed as a lunatic if you were that carefree.
Unless you were Douglas MacArthur and you had no fear. Unless you were a
True.
god amongst mortal men. We'll have a special Douglas MacArthur episode. Where we just talk about Douglas MacArthur.
You're a little too into him, given how problematic he is as an
I'm into a
historical
lot of.
figure.
I date toxic men, Fowler. You should know this, so it's no wonder why I'm into Douglas MacArthur and Huey Long. I have a toxicity problem with the men that I gravitate towards. Don't date me. I'm a crazy bitch. Okay. I kid. But we gotta close out this episode. I gotta go to sleep. Fowler has to go, I don't know, wax his mustache or whatever. I don't know what you do at night, Fowler.
Just 8 hours straight of waxing.
Anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're gonna be following this Russia situation. Hopefully we don't get like nuked. Knock on wood. That would suck. That would make me very unhappy.
Also, if we ever got nuked, the US government wouldn't tell you. Like, they'd know the bombs were coming down, and they would just be like, no Amber Alert, you're just eating a bagel, and suddenly you're dead.
Yeah. Nah, dude, he can't do that shit till Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, okay? That's what I'm waiting on right now. It's fucking... or the 17th re-release of Skyrim. Anyway, I digress. Y'all have a good rest of your night. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you in the next podcast.